Welcome to another edition of your MPC Masterclass. In the first two previous videos found in the links above, we've gone over the MPC main screen and also the MPC browser. So what we're doing in the next three videos is diving into the specific edit menus inside of the track, the program, and also the sequence. In this video, we're going to dive in and get you knowing everything you need to know about the track menu. If you want to check out my favorite, jump to about 20 minutes and 30 seconds into this video and check out bounce to audio track, and then see what we do with the audio track after we bounce it down. All right, in this video, we're going to dive into the submenu under track. So right in the center of the screen, hit the lower right corner under track where the pencil is, and now we have this submenu. Now, the first thing to note is that clear will reset the track name. It clears out all the MIDI data, and it also clears out the program that is assigned to that track. However, the program is still going to be in the memory of the current project. If you want to clear that out, you're going to have to go into the submenu in the program menu. But let's take a look at that. So here we have a track, very basic, just playing back. And if I want to reset everything inside of this track, I'm going to go back into my submenu, hit clear, and it will ask me to confirm. I'm going to hit clear, and you can see that it goes back to not having anything assigned to this track and no program assigned. Now if we go into here, double tap, we can still see that the program that I was using is still in the memory of this project. It's just no longer assigned to that track. Now going back in, to the right of that we have explode. Now this is used when you want to export stems. Without exploding a track, all the drums will be on a single channel. This will create a new track for each sound that has a MIDI event on it, and mute the original track with the program on it. Along with doing this for exporting stems, this is going to also make sequencing a lot easier, because now you'll have an individual sound assigned to an individual track, which makes it a lot easier to mute inside of a sequence. Remember, inside the MPC, track mutes are attached to sequences, but pad mutes are attached to the program. As an example, we have this very basic beat idea. But let's say I want to make an alternative sequence of this where half of those sounds were muted and the other half weren't. If I went into the mute function for just the pads, when I switch in between sequences, the pads are still going to be muted because mutes for pads are attached to the program, whereas mutes for tracks are attached to the sequence. So let's go into our menu and let's explode. And what we can see now is that on the original track, track number 1 with that sequence, it still has the drum program, but it is now muted right here. And if we go into the other tracks, we can see that it's going to have each track separated by sound. Let's go into the grid. We can see here, okay, this assigned the kick to its own track. Let's come up here and then switch. This assigned the clap, the hi-hats, the other hi-hats, the other clap, and then the other snare. So right there, if we go into our mute, now we can see that all of those individual sounds have their own track. This makes it very easy for sequencing. So to show that, I'm going to go back to the main. I'm going to come up here, and I'm just going to copy this sequence into the next one. And I'm just going to call this sequence 2. Do it. Now that I'm in sequence 2, I can come in and mute, let's say, the kick and the clap, and play that back. And if I click to my next sequence, switch over to the other sequence here. So exploding tracks is not only extremely handy for exporting stems, what it allows you to do is do very quick sequencing, because now you can take all those individual drum sounds, copy the sequence from one to the next, and then mute the individual drum sounds as opposed to having to go into the grid and delete them in between sequences. Now let's take a look at double speed events. All this is going to do is take all of the notes inside of the sequence and half the time. Now, note that it does not fill up the remainder of the sequence, so you will have empty space after you do this. So let's go back into our main. Let's double the speeds, and then go back in, and we can see that now it is now double the tempo, but we still have open space over here that we would need to copy and paste or do an alternative sequence right in this section to fill it in. Now moving over to the right, half the speed events. This would actually undo what we just did with double speed. So let's listen to what we have. And if we half the speed of that, it brings it back to normal. And if we half the speed of that again, what it's going to do but please note, if we zoom out, it actually moved all the MIDI notes over, so now this is a 4-bar sequence. So now let's take a look at split events. Split events will divide all the notes or selected notes by a specific value. This is actually great for hi-hats or melodies if you want to try alternative version. So let's take a look at this idea right here where we have just a basic beat with some 8th note hi-hats. But let's say I wanted to add a little hi-hat roll right here to this note. Let's zoom into this note so we can see. So if I selected actually these 2 notes and split them in half, I would now have a 16th note roll. So I can select those 2 notes, come back into my main and go into split events and only selected notes. And I'm going to split each one of those notes just in half. So I want each one of those to go into just 2 separate ones, and that will create a 16th note roll. I'm going to hit do it and then come back here and we can see that they're now split. Now let's say we want to do 30-second rolls. We could either split these again or over here on these 2, so we'd have to cut each one of those into 4 separate parts. So let's select those. Let's go back into our main, go back into split events, and just turn this to 4, hit do it, and then coming back into our grid view, we can see that we've just created 30-second rolls. And we can even take that a step further, and let's say we wanted to take all of these guys and then cut them even more. We can come back in, go in here, split events. Let's just take all those and bring them in half. Hit do it. And now we have. So split events is great for doing that not only with hi-hats but other drum sounds. But another thing you could do is also with, let's say, a bass line. Here we have on track 2 a simple bass line to go with that beat. And what we can do is, let's say, select some of these notes and then divide them using split event to add a little bit of variety to the groove of this bass line. So I'm just going to select, let's say, these last 2. They're selected. Come back in to split events and just cut them in half. Hit do it. And then back into our grid, we can see they're split. And let's say I wanted to do a triplet on this guy right here. I can come back into main, hit this, split events. And let's split that into 3 even ones. Now we see we have some triplet rolls going on here. Now moving over, pitch quantize will snap the notes to a selected pitch and root note. So what we're able to do is apply to only selected notes or the entire thing. Now let's go back to that bass line and just see about changing this minor chord progression to a major chord progression. So we, by default, have the root note of C and in a major. So let's go back over, take a look at everything that's going on here, and we're going to apply this to everything. So right now it's in minor. Let's go back in and do it. We can see that it shifted all the notes up accordingly to take it from a minor to a major. If we undo it, we're going to see the notes drop back down. So not only is pitch quantized good to change the mood of what you're working with from, let's say, a major to a minor, at the same time you're doing that, you can even change the root note of it. So we're going to change it to a major, but we're going to pitch it up, let's say, 3 steps. So that's what we've been working with. Let's hit do it. So we changed the mood from minor to major and also changed the pitch. Next, let's take a look at Humanize. Now, Humanize will take a bit of trial and error to get down. We're able to add human elements to the timing, such as how drastic will this effect be. The nice thing is that you get a little help below that tells you how much shift you should be anticipating. So while we move this slider, we're going to see it go from more than 64th notes, all less than 30 seconds, a bit more than 30 seconds. So it's going to give us a little heads up of how much movement we're actually going to have in those notes. You can also push or pull the notes with eagerness. This will allow you to have a bit more of an edgy, eager feel to the beat, or a bit more of a laid-back, lazy feel if you push them to the right. You can also humanize the length of the notes and also the velocity. Personally, I use this feature very lightly and have had the best results when using it on specific events and not necessarily the entire idea. So here in this sequence, we have some 16th note hi-hats that are at 100% velocity, very stale and robotic. So now let's go into Humanize, and we're going to just have it nudge it a very small amount. Let's say less than 64th notes. We're not going to change the eagerness. We're not going to change the length, but we are going to humanize the velocity. And we're going to leave it not too crazy. We're just going to do about 10% velocity change on here. So let's hit apply, go in, and we can see that there's been a little bit of a shift, and then also the velocity has shifted quite a bit. So we can hear by listening to that, that's way too much movement on the length. So let's go in and undo that. Back to very robotic. Let's go back into main. Go to Humanize, and we're going to bring this quite a bit of ways down. Let's do it, and let's go back in and see. So now we just have a slight bit of movement. That will just add a little bit of groove and shuffle to your beat and keep it less robotic. Also, Humanize works great with melodic elements as well. So here on track 2, I have a piano that is playing some basic chords. You can see they're all at full velocity. They're all 100% on the grid. Very stale, very robotic. Let's expand this so we can see the velocity of everything that's going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into Humanize, and we're going to adjust the timing a little bit. We'll adjust the eagerness to make it a little bit after the beat, because typically the piano player is a little bit more laid back than a drummer. And we're going to not have it change the note length, but we are going to change the velocity just a little bit. And we're going to apply it to everything. So this is what we had before. We can hit apply to hear the results. Now back in the menu, we have generate random events. Now generate random events has 2 different types of functionality. We have melodic events if we're on an instrument track, or we have drum events if we're on a drum program track. So in a new sequence, I have just a drum kit assigned to a track with nothing sequenced in. Let's go ahead and just lay down a basic 4 to the floor. Nothing exciting. But what we're able to do is come in to generate random notes. You can see that it will recognize that I'm on a drum track, and we have a couple different features here. We have replace all events, replace events in a specific note range, or add to existing events. For this one, I want to replace events in a specific note range because what I'm going to do is generate some random hi-hat patterns. So when we select that, we're able to say, okay, how long are these notes? I want to do 16th notes. How many bars? 2 bars, because this is a 2-bar sequence. And now I have, okay, so where specifically am I going to generate this notes? So now I'm going to select bank 1. And instead of staying in bank 1, I'm going to scroll all the way down to the bottom where we see range. That will allow me to select the specific pad. And the cool thing is if I crank this all the way down so it's A1 and A1, as I move this one up, it's going to move the end pad up as well. So now I have just specifically A3, which is my hi-hat on there. So then I have, how many notes do I want? 10% density right now. How much rhythmic variation? Right now it defaults to 25. And let's just see what that sounds like. As you can see, every time I hit apply, it is creating a new pattern. And since up here we have it under replace events and note range, it's going to replace the current pattern that I have. So now if we switch over to track number 2, which has a basic piano on it, and we go into generate random notes, we'll see that it is now selected melodic notes. We have the same replace all events, replace events in note range, or replace existing events. For this, we're going to replace all events. And 2-bar pattern, note length. Let's turn that down just to 8th notes because we don't want to go too crazy with this piano. Also, what is our range? It defaults to C2 to C4, which you can change. You can also turn legato on and change the polyphony. So this, keeping it at 1, would be a good way to come up with some melodic ideas. And you can also constrain it to a scale and a root note. So let's say I'm working on a song with a singer and I know that she likes to work in F minor. I can come in here in F natural minor. How many notes do I want? Well, 75% density and 8th notes. And right now there's nothing. And let's just hit apply and see what happens. And what we're going to do, since we have polyphony turned on 1, what it's going to do is just generate single note melodic ideas. And let's just turn up that density, hit apply again. And every time I hit apply, it's going to replace the previous idea because we have replace all events turned on right there. So for me personally, I typically don't use generate random events with melodic elements with anything besides single note polyphony. I like to use it to try and come up with different melodic top line ideas, but also it's great for bass lines too. So if you had a bass instrument on here, you could use this to generate some unique bass ideas. Another area where melodic events are actually really nice to use is more electronic music, such as, let's say, techno, where it's less of a melodic catchy top line and more of an arpeggiated kind of groovy rhythm. So now I've gone into track 2 and I've changed it to a hype with just a pluck. This is called EDM Pits 1. I think it's the first one. But let's come back into generate random events and let's go up and turn this to actually 16th notes, maximum density, and just hit apply. And now so I really like to use the generate random events with something a little faster, more of an electronic vibe to it, because then what we can do is we can just go into the elements and start tweaking. Next we have copy track. Now copy track will just copy that track to the next track. This is really handy if you're doing something like layering sounds and you don't want to select all the MIDI notes and copy and paste them over. We can simply go in, assign this to track 3, hit do it. So then it will copy everything over to track number 3, and we can just come in here and change the program to a different one. And right there, we just created a new layer on this right here. Next, we have bounce to sample. So this will take the entire track, including the plugin or the instrument and any sort of effects, and then just consolidate and bounce it down to a sample that then you could assign to a single pad. Now moving over from bounce to sample, we have bounce to audio track. So what that's going to do is very similar to bounce to sample, where it's going to take the plugin and then all the effects, but it's going to actually add it directly to an audio track and switch over. So if we go to bounce to audio track, it's going to export it. And then when we get back, we can see that now we're on an audio track, and it's actually assigned that to an audio track. Now, the cool thing about this is now that we have it in audio, we can actually manipulate this audio and do a lot of cool stuff. So let's say we wanted to mute a section. We could come in here and just cut this little section right here. We could mute that out. We could even unmute that, and then let's say just take this little section and reverse it. And I do this quite a bit actually, bouncing a track down into audio and then coming in and truly manipulating it. So let's go into our zoom, and we're going to then cut out this guy right here, and then take this track and reverse this one. We could even do things like take this right here and add a fade in just on this. And let's also add a fade in on this guy. And so we took that track, bounced it to audio, cut it up, reversed some things, added fade-ins, and then added a little stutter, and now it's much more interesting. Now down at the bottom, we have export as pattern and convert to progression. Export to pattern will essentially save the MIDI sequence as something you can bring in later and store it in the browser. And finally, we have convert to progressions. What this will do is it will take any sort of chord progression that you have sequenced into a MIDI track. It will save it as an MPC progression and assign it to the individual pads so that in the future, you can play that chord progression, change the key of it simply by hitting the pads on the left. Now, my favorite part about this is I have a buddy that's an amazing piano player, and he comes up with chords that I really haven't ever thought of. So I'll take the MPC over to his studio, I'll plug the MIDI out from his keyboard into my MPC, and I'll just have him do a whole bunch of 4-chord progressions, and I'll save each one of those as a convert to progression and then access them later. There it is. I hope that helped you understand all the things you can do within the track menu. Please stay tuned, because coming up soon will be the edit menus for both the program and the sequence. On that note, thanks for your time. Thanks for your attention. Now go make something cool.